A racist cop torches Mike Tyson's car. Big mistake. In seconds, the legend strikes back, delivering justice in the most unexpected way. Subscribe to the channel, share the video, and write in the comments what city you were from. The sun was just beginning to rise over Charleston, South Carolina, casting a warm, golden hue over the quiet streets. The morning air carried the scent of fresh dew, the distant hum of traffic breaking the stillness. In the heart of the city, nestled between old brick buildings and oak-lined sidewalks, sat Gordy's Diner, a beloved local breakfast spot. As the world stirred awake, so did Mike Tyson, the legendary former heavyweight champion. Retirement had given him time to enjoy life's simple pleasures, but some mornings, the old fighter in him still woke before dawn, his body instinctively rising as if preparing for another bout. He didn't need the roar of the crowd or the flashing lights anymore. These days, peace was found in routine, morning drives, strong coffee, and a plate of pancakes at a quiet diner. This morning was no different. Stepping outside his home, Mike took a deep breath, inhaling the crisp air. His gaze fell on his most treasured possession, a pristine, jet-black 1965 Shelby Cobra gleaming in the sunlight. The car wasn't just metal and wheels to him. It was a symbol of his triumphs, his struggles, and the life he had built beyond the ring. Running a hand over the polished hood, he couldn't help but smirk. This car had seen more fights than most men had ever thrown a punch. Sliding into the leather seat, he turned the ignition. The powerful engine growled to life, sending vibrations through his fingertips. As he drove through the streets, heads turned, some in admiration, others in curiosity. To the locals who recognized him, he was a legend. To those who didn't, he was a man who didn't belong. Arriving at Gordy's Diner, he pulled into the parking lot with practiced ease, slipping into a space near the front. The diner's regulars, mostly working-class folks grabbing breakfast before a long shift, took notice. Some whispered, others simply watched. He felt it, the subtle weight of eyes lingering a little too long. It wasn't the admiration of fans. It was the quiet judgment of those who saw him and immediately thought, that can't be his car. Unbothered, Mike stepped out, the scent of freshly brewed coffee and sizzling bacon drifting toward him. The bell above the diner door jingled as he stepped inside, greeted instantly by the familiar voice of Gladys, a stout, gray-haired waitress who had been slinging plates at Gordy's for decades. "Well, if it ain't my favorite champ," she beamed, wiping her hands on her apron. "Been too long, Mike. How's that sweet ride of yours holding up?" Mike chuckled, sliding onto a bar stool. "Still purring like a tiger, Gladys, just like me." "Pfft, to you old men and your cars," she teased, pouring him a steaming mug of coffee. "Same as always? Pancakes, eggs, and extra bacon?" "You know it." As Mike relaxed, sipping his coffee, the diner hummed with its usual morning chatter. Truckers talking shop, a group of construction workers discussing their next project, an elderly couple sharing quiet conversation. It was the kind of place where people kept to themselves. But that changed the moment the wrong kind of authority walked in. A loud screech broke through the morning air, cutting through the casual atmosphere like a blade. A black and white patrol car pulled into the lot, its tires grinding against the pavement with an unnecessary show of force. Mike's eyes flicked toward the window. Something felt off. Out stepped Officer Nathan Briggs, a tall, broad-shouldered man in his early 40s, his uniform starched and pristine, his sunglasses reflecting the world around him. His every movement oozed self-importance, his badge glinting under the sun like a weapon in itself. Briggs wasn't just any cop. He was a man who thrived on intimidation, who saw his badge as a crown rather than a responsibility. He had a reputation in Charleston. People didn't speak of him openly, but the stories were there. He was the kind of officer who didn't need probable cause when his gut told him the wrong kind of person was in the wrong place. And right now, his gut was telling him Mike Tyson didn't belong here. Briggs's gaze locked onto the Shelby Cobra, his lips pressing into a tight line. The car, its polished frame gleaming under the sun, looked like it belonged to a CEO or a politician, not a retired boxer, and certainly not a black man sitting in a diner on the good side of town. His hand instinctively went to his belt, where his baton hung at his hip, as if he could already feel the need to use it. Briggs took his time circling the car, his fingertips grazing the hood as if testing its legitimacy, as if the shine of its surface might reveal its true owner. He muttered under his breath, "No way." Mike watched from inside the diner, his grip tightening around his coffee mug. He had seen this look before, the way men like Briggs always made assumptions before they even asked questions. The officer stopped beside the car, his stance wide, claiming the space like it was his own. Then, with slow, deliberate movements, he turned and began walking toward the diner. The chatter inside had died down. Every eye in the diner was now fixed on the officer as he approached the door, his boots thudding against the pavement with a weight that carried more than just authority. It carried intent. Gladys, sensing the shift, leaned in toward Mike, her voice low. "You want me to call somebody?" Mike smiled, but there was no humor in it. Not yet. The bell above the door jingled again, but this time the sound rang hollow. Briggs stepped inside, hands on his belt, eyes locked on Mike. For a moment, the two men simply stared at each other. One was a man who had conquered giants in the ring. The other was a man who had never thrown a punch in his life, but thought his badge made him invincible. And then Briggs spoke. "That your car outside?" His voice was thick with accusation. The words weighted, leaving no room for an honest answer. Mike took a slow sip of his coffee before answering. "Yeah, got a problem with that?" Briggs's jaw tensed. He already knew how this was going to go. But what he didn't know was that he had just picked a fight he wasn't ready for. Mike Tyson wasn't a man easily rattled. Years in the ring had trained him to read opponents, to anticipate their next move before they even made it. But what he saw outside Gordy's diner that morning sent a ripple of tension through his body. Officer Nathan Briggs stood by his 1965 Shelby Cobra, twirling his baton in slow, lazy circles, his expression one of thinly veiled contempt. The way his eyes traced the curves of the car wasn't admiration, it was possession. He wasn't inspecting, he was laying claim. Inside the diner, the air had shifted. The low hum of conversation had died down. Every set of eyes flicked between the muscular black man finishing his coffee and the uniformed officer outside, radiating silent hostility. Mike exhaled through his nose, keeping his emotions in check. He didn't want to make assumptions, but experience told him he didn't need to. This was about to go south, fast. "Something wrong?" Gladys, the diner's longtime waitress, asked, her voice cautious. Mike forced a small smile. "No, just gotta handle something. Thanks for breakfast, Gladys. It was perfect as always." "Be careful, baby," she said, eyes darting toward the window. She had seen too many men walk out into trouble like this before. Mike pushed open the door and stepped into the early morning light, the warmth of the sun doing little to offset the chill rolling off Briggs. The second their eyes met, Briggs smirked, but it wasn't a friendly one. It was the smirk of a man who already believed he'd won. "Morning." Briggs's tone was casual, almost mocking. He tapped the hood of the Cobra with his baton, the metallic clang echoing through the lot. "Nice ride. Yours?" Mike's jaw tensed, but he kept his voice even. "Yeah, it's mine. Something wrong?" Briggs tilted his head, pretending to consider. "Yeah, something's real wrong. This car. See, it don't belong here." He took a slow step closer, towering over Mike like a predator, toying with its prey. A car like this? In a place like this? Driven by someone like you? Come on, man. We both know that don't add up. Mike inhaled deeply, forcing himself to stay calm, though a familiar fire burned in his chest. He had seen this play before, the way power made small men feel invincible. He slowly reached into his pocket and pulled out the registration, holding it up for Briggs to see. Paperwork's all in order. Take a look. Briggs barely glanced at it. Instead, with a casual flick of his wrist, he smacked the paper out of Mike's hand. It fluttered to the pavement like discarded trash. A beat of silence. The tension in the air coiled like a loaded spring. Mike's fingers twitched at his sides, but he didn't move. I don't need to see no damn paperwork, Briggs sneered, because I know how this goes. A stolen car, a slick excuse. Then the good old it's a misunderstanding story. You got a criminal record, don't you, Tyson? Ain't that why you disappeared for a while? The crowd was forming now. People hesitated on the sidewalk, their eyes darting between the officer, and then he did the unthinkable. With a swift, deliberate movement, Briggs raised his baton and slammed it against the Cobra's front headlight. Crack! The glass shattered instantly, shards raining onto the asphalt. The crowd gasped. Phones were out now, cameras rolling. Mike stilled. A familiar pressure built in his chest, the same pressure he had felt before every major fight of his life. That moment, just before the first punch landed. He clenched his fists, breathed in deep, breathed out slow. Briggs grinned, twirling the baton again. There now, maybe that'll teach you not to flaunt stolen goods. Mike's voice was low, dangerously quiet. You got 5 seconds to step away from my car. Briggs laughed again, this time louder, playing for the crowd. Oh? What you gonna do, champ? You gonna punch a cop? He leaned in, his breath reeking of arrogance. Try it. I'd love to see you back in a cell. Where you belong. Mike didn't flinch, didn't blink, just stared, his muscles coiled tight, ready to explode, and then Briggs took it a step further. He pulled a cigarette from his pocket, lit it, and exhaled slowly. Then, with a deliberate smirk, he flicked it, right into the Cobra's open window. The ember landed on the pristine leather seats, a tiny orange glow licking at the surface. Smoke curled upward. For a second, no one moved. And then the fire spread. The leather caught. The orange glow grew, flickering into flames. The crowd erupted, shouting, gasping, some even screaming. Briggs stepped back, watching the destruction unfold like a masterpiece. Now, that's what I call justice. His voice was filled with pure, unfiltered hatred. Mike exhaled, long, slow, controlled. Then he moved, and Briggs had no idea what was coming. The flames licked at the leather seats, their glow flickering in the reflection of Mike Tyson's dark eyes. For one long second, the world seemed to stop. The murmuring crowd fell silent. The scent of burning upholstery tainted the crisp morning air. Phones were raised high, recording every second of the unfolding confrontation. Officer Nathan Briggs stood back, admiring his handiwork like an artist admiring a masterpiece of destruction. He exhaled slowly, a smirk twisting on his lips. There now, Tyson, that should teach you. Maybe next time you'll think twice about rolling into a neighborhood where you don't belong. His voice was casual, as if he had simply stepped on a piece of gum and wiped it off his boot. But this wasn't a minor inconvenience. This was a declaration of war. Mike's fingers tightened into fists at his sides. His entire body, once a calm sea, was now a storm barely contained beneath the surface. The heat of the fire inside his car paled in comparison to the fire rising within him. He took a slow step forward, his voice low, controlled, but sharp as a blade. You've got 5 seconds to step away. Briggs let out a mocking laugh, shaking his head as if amused by the sheer audacity of the statement. Step away? He scoffed. What are you going to do, champ? Throw a punch? Break the law right here, Right now, in front of all these nice people. His eyes glinted with cruel anticipation. He wanted Mike to react, to snap, to give him a reason to slam him onto the pavement in cuffs. Mike exhaled, slow and measured. He could already see how this would play out. If he made a move, Briggs would spin the story. The narrative would be twisted, another violent black man attacking an officer. The system would back him up, and suddenly Mike Tyson would be the criminal. But he wasn't that man, not anymore. "I'm not here to fight you, officer." Mike's voice was steel wrapped in velvet, steady but unwavering. "I just want to leave. You've already made your point. Just let me go." The crowd, watching closely, began to murmur with agreement. Whispers spread like wildfire. "He didn't do anything wrong. That cop is out of control. Why won't he just let the man leave?" Briggs heard them, the whispers, the eyes on him, and he didn't like it. He turned sharply toward the crowd, barking his authority back into the space. "This is a police matter. Unless you want to be part of it, I suggest you shut up and keep walking." But they didn't move. For the first time, Briggs wasn't in control. His hand twitched toward his belt, fingers brushing against the cool steel of his handcuffs. A final move to reassert dominance. He lifted them, their metallic gleam catching the light. "Oh, you're leaving all right, Tyson. But you're coming with me." The crowd erupted in protest. "You can't do that. He didn't do anything. We saw it all. He was just eating breakfast. This ain't right." Mike took a slow breath, his broad shoulders rising and falling as he forced himself to remain calm, measured. But then, crack! The sound of the baton striking the side mirror of his car sent shockwaves through the parking lot. Glass shattered onto the pavement. Mike's jaw tightened, his body stiffened, his breathing slowed. The heat in his chest turned into something cold, something deadly, something he hadn't felt in a long time. Briggs wasn't finished. With deliberate cruelty, he swung again, this time at the windshield, sending deep spiderweb cracks through the glass. Another hit, another, and then he turned back to Mike, smiling like a wolf baring its teeth. "See, now we got real damage. That's going to be a problem. Looks like we'll need to take you downtown after all." He raised the baton for one more swing, and then Mike moved. It happened faster than the human eye could track. 1 second, Briggs was mid-swing. The next, Mike's hand caught his wrist in midair, locking it in place with unshakable force. The baton never landed. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Briggs froze. For the first time, his cocky smirk disappeared. Mike's grip tightened, not crushing, not violent, but unbreakable. His voice, when he spoke, was a low rumble, a quiet storm on the horizon. "That's enough." Briggs yanked his arm back, but it didn't move. His wrist was locked in a grip that felt like steel. For the first time in his life, Briggs felt small. He tried again, twisting his body, jerking away, but Mike's grip didn't budge. The crowd watched in stunned silence. A deadly calm filled the space between them. Then, with a single calculated move, Mike released him. Briggs stumbled backward, nearly tripping over his own feet. His face flushed red, his fingers twitching toward his holster. Mike's gaze never wavered. "Think carefully about what you do next." Briggs's breath came faster now, his pulse pounding. His hand hovered over his gun. Mike didn't move, didn't blink, just waited, and then the first siren wailed in the distance. Briggs's eyes snapped up toward the sound, and just like that, he knew. Backup had arrived, but not for him. The walls were closing in, and for the first time, Officer Briggs realized he had finally picked a fight he couldn't win. The air in the parking lot was electric, charged with the weight of what had just happened. The baton lay discarded on the asphalt, its power now meaningless. The crowd stood frozen, watching, waiting, their breaths held as the tension between Mike Tyson and Officer Briggs reached a boiling point. Briggs, his chest heaving, his face twisted with rage, took a step forward, his hands curling into fists at his sides. He had lost control of the situation, and he knew it, but the realization only fueled his anger. He wasn't going to let some washed-up boxer humiliate him in front of all these people. "You think you're real tough, huh, Tyson? You think you can just disrespect a cop like that and walk away?" Mike didn't move. He stood tall, unwavering, his broad shoulders squared as he met Briggs's glare with a calm, steady gaze. His voice, when he spoke, was low and controlled, but beneath it was a warning, a storm, barely contained. "I don't want trouble. I never did." Mike's eyes flicked to the baton on the ground. "But I'm done letting you push people around." The crowd erupted in agreement, their voices rising. "He's right. You started this." "We saw everything. Leave him alone." Briggs's eyes darted to the people surrounding them, their phones capturing every second. His authority was slipping through his fingers. He had two choices: back down and lose face forever, or make Tyson pay. His pride made the decision for him. With a snarl, he lunged. A mistake. Mike saw it coming before Briggs's body even moved. The shift in his weight, the tightening of his jaw, all the tells of an amateur brawler fueled by anger, not skill. Mike didn't even need to dodge. He simply turned, sidestepping with ease. Briggs's fist cut through nothing but air, his momentum carrying him forward, sending him stumbling. The crowd burst into laughter. "You can't even hit him." "This ain't a fair fight, officer. You don't stand a chance." Briggs's face burned red-hot with humiliation. And then he reached for his taser. The crowd's laughter died in an instant. Mike's sharp eyes caught the movement, the flick of Briggs's wrist as he yanked the weapon from his belt. A cruel grin spread across the officer's face. The crackling hum of the taser filled the air as Briggs leveled it at Mike's chest. "Let's see how tough you are when you're twitching on the ground." The crowd screamed in protest. "No, that's excessive force." "Put that away, you coward." Briggs didn't listen. He fired. A split second. That's all Mike needed. He moved, faster than anyone expected. With a swift turn, his body shifted just enough. The taser prongs whizzed past him, missing him by mere inches. Briggs's smug grin vanished. Mike's eyes locked onto him, cold, unrelenting. "You just crossed the line, officer." The crowd erupted into chaos. People shouted, recording the entire thing. "He tried to tase him for nothing." "That cop is out of control." Briggs's hand shook, his grip on the taser tightening, but it was useless now. He had taken his best shot and missed. The power dynamic had shifted completely, and Briggs knew it. Mike stepped closer, his presence towering, unshaken, his voice razor-sharp, cut through the noise. "You got nothing left, officer. No badge, no backup, no power over me." Briggs staggered backward. His pulse pounded in his ears. He had started this fight, and now he was losing it. The sirens in the distance grew louder. Briggs's head snapped toward the street. Backup was coming, but as the flashing lights rounded the corner, he wasn't so sure they were coming for Mike anymore. The weight of the moment settled over the parking lot like a thundercloud, thick with anticipation. Officer Briggs, once the embodiment of unchecked authority, now lay beneath the iron grip of a man who had spent a lifetime fighting battles both inside and outside the ring. The once boisterous crowd had fallen into a tense silence, their phones capturing every second. Briggs thrashed beneath Mike's hold, his face twisted in rage and humiliation. "Get off me, you washed-up animal! You think you can just put your hands on a cop? You're gonna regret this!" Mike, unmoved, his strength steady but restrained, leaned in just enough for Briggs to feel the heat of his words. "The only one regretting anything right now is you." The words hit harder than any punch ever could. Suddenly, the distant wail of sirens cut through the air. The crowd erupted into cheers. They knew this time justice was finally on its way. Briggs stopped struggling. For the first time, fear flickered in his eyes. Justice arrives. Flashing red and blue lights screamed into the parking lot as 3 squad cars skidded to a halt. The real law had arrived. Doors flung open, a team of officers rushed out, their hands hovering over their holsters. At the center of it all stood Captain Raymond Cole, an older, battle-worn officer whose presence commanded immediate respect. He strode through the crowd, his gaze taking in the scene, the shattered car window, the baton lying abandoned, and Briggs, red-faced and pinned beneath Mike Tyson. Briggs locked eyes with him, desperation in his voice. "Captain, arrest this thug. He assaulted me. Cole's cold stare silenced him. Without a word, he pulled out a sleek tablet and turned it around for Briggs to see. The screen flashed with multiple angles of damning footage, recordings from the crowd, all showing Briggs's aggression, the destruction of property, the use of excessive force. The evidence was undeniable. Briggs froze. His bluster evaporated, replaced by a sickening realization there was no way out of this. Cole's jaw tightened as he finally spoke. "Briggs, you're done." The crowd erupted in cheers as two officers stepped forward, cuffs in hand. Briggs snapped back to life, his voice shrill with panic. "No, I was doing my job. You can't do this to me. Cole cut him off, his tone razor sharp. "Your job? Your job is to serve and protect, not abuse and destroy, and today you failed." Briggs thrashed violently, his face contorted with rage as the officers wrenched his hands behind his back. The click of the handcuffs was deafening, a symbol of justice long overdue. The crowd cheered. Briggs, once a terror in a uniform, was now just another criminal in cuffs. The reckoning as Briggs was dragged toward the squad car, he turned his venom back to Mike. His voice spat hatred, but his words carried no power anymore. "This ain't over, Tyson. You think you won? You're still nothing, just another thug in a fancy car. You don't belong here." Mike, standing tall, didn't even flinch. He let the words hang in the air for a moment before finally speaking. "Funny, I was thinking the same thing about you." Briggs's face contorted with fury as he was shoved into the back seat. The door slammed shut. The crowd exploded into cheers once more. Mike had won without ever throwing a punch. The aftermath. The energy in the air shifted from anger to celebration. Captain Cole turned to Mike, his expression softening. "Mr. Tyson, on behalf of the department, I want to apologize. What happened here today should never happen anywhere, and it won't again." Mike studied the captain's face, looking for sincerity. He found it. He extended a hand, and Cole took it. A firm handshake, a silent agreement that change had to start somewhere. The crowd surged forward, their voices filled with admiration and gratitude. "You stood up for all of us. Mike, you're a legend inside and outside the ring. We need more people like you in this world." A young boy, no older than 10, pushed through the crowd. He looked up at Mike, eyes wide with awe. With shaky hands he held out a crumpled notebook and a pen. "Mr. Tyson, can I have your autograph?" Mike paused. Of all the victories in his life, this one meant the most. He took the pen, knelt down, and signed the boy's notebook with a smile. The kid beamed, gripping it like the greatest treasure he'd ever received. 1 month later. The echoes of that day rippled far beyond the parking lot. Briggs was fired, disgraced, and now faced multiple charges. The courtroom was packed as he stood before the judge. The charges were read aloud. Misuse of authority, destruction of property, assault. Briggs, now a broken man, mumbled his plea. "Guilty, Your Honor." Justice had spoken. The message that lived on Mike Tyson's actions became more than just a viral moment. He became a symbol. He spoke at community meetings, rallies, even schools, spreading a message about justice, dignity, and standing against oppression. He never asked for this fight, but sometimes the right fights find you. Standing in front of a crowd at a town hall, Mike looked out at the people who saw him not just as a fighter, but as a leader. He smiled, took a deep breath, and spoke the words that would define his legacy beyond boxing. Strength isn't about how hard you hit. It's about how hard you stand when the world tries to knock you down. The room erupted in applause, and somewhere in the crowd a little boy with a crumpled notebook watched, knowing that one day he too would stand. Lesson from the story: power is not measured by a badge, a title, or brute force. It is defined by integrity, restraint, and the courage to stand against injustice. Mike Tyson's story reminds us that true strength lies in self-control and the willingness to fight for what is right, even without throwing a punch. In today's world, we must hold those in authority accountable, speak up against discrimination, and support those who are unfairly targeted. Justice thrives when people unite, refuse to be silenced, and demand change. Stand firm, lead with dignity, and remember, actions speak louder than words. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe Undercover Insights channel.